right, y'all. Welcome back to the show. It's Anti-War Radio on Chaos 95.9 FM in Austin, Texas. We're streaming live worldwide on the internet at chaosradioaustin.org and at antiwar.com/radio. And our next guest on the show today is Ryan Dawson. He keeps the websites Rise 2 Cents. That's number 2, rise2cents.com. And cents is spelled like in your brain, not in your pocket there. And he also keeps anti-neocons. That's rise2cents.com/anti-neocons. And I'm reading here that anti-neocons has declared February 26th the official Hate Richard Perle Day. Welcome back to the show. Rye, how are you doing?
It's good to be back on the show. I also got my 2 cents in the other day on the Jon Stewart Daily Show.
Yeah, that was cool. I saw that. In fact, they played a whole little montage of people talking bad about Bank of America, and you had the harshest one of all. So congratulations, man. That was cool.
Yeah, I was glad to get my 2 cents there. That's the second time I was on the Daily Show. The first time I wasn't even aware of it because I was in Japan, and I missed the whole thing. But yeah, on to
Did you ever
Richard
get to
Perle.
see the video of it, the first one?
Yeah, and I was actually bashing Richard Perle in that one.
Oh, awesome. Well, so answer me this. Why is today official Hate Richard Perle Day? Because, of course, everybody hates Richard Perle every day.
I don't know anybody that, well, I'm going to continue to hate him every day. I just thought I'd make a holiday out of it. I was getting some news that there was a voice vote in California about a no cursing week. They weren't allowed to cuss for a week or something. Like, shouldn't cuss anyway. And apparently their government had nothing better to do. Yeah. And I just decided, hey, we're anti-neocons. We used to be antineocons.com. Someone grabbed the domain. That's why it's Rise 2 Cents now. But why don't we make our own holiday? And I was thinking about all the neocons. Can't stand any of them. And it took me a while, but I determined that Richard Perle, in my opinion, and you can debate about this or not, but he's the very worst one. I can't think of any redeeming quality about that guy. So we decided to have a Hate Richard Perle Day. So on this day, people can blog and make videos and say all the nasty things they want about Richard Perle.
All right. Well, that's why you're here, to say all the nasty things you want about Richard Perle. And just so, everybody's got their head on straight, Richard Perle is the guy with the dark circles around his eyes and the big fat neck to rival Fred Kagan. He's one of the fattest, most slovenly of the neocons. And well, I don't know. Let's start with how many times, to your knowledge, Rye, from anti-neocons, has Richard Perle been under investigation by the FBI for espionage on behalf of the Israeli government?
7, I think, at least. I mean, if you want to go all the way back to the 70s, I think it's at least 7 times. I mean, some of it's all from the same cases, but I mean, it's not just for the Israelis or the Israeli lobby. It's also for his financial profiteering through Trireme and Hollinger, also Boeing and Global Crossing and the Israeli lobby and arms to Israel. So I don't know how many I just named there, like 5 or 6.
Yeah, this is the guy that had, played a major role in having America attack Iraq for their own good. Sounds like a lot of interest. Why don't you be a little bit more specific about Trireme and the arms manufacturers and what you know about this guy? Go ahead.
Sure, I'll get into that first. First of all, at this time, Trireme is a private equity firm. They collected money from venture capitalists, and they mainly invested that money into techs and weapons stocks, etc. And he was on the board of directors for Trireme with some other wonderful guys like Henry Kissinger and James Thompson from the 9/11 Convention. And what they did there was a couple of different things. The ones that he got in trouble for Seymour Hersh or Cy Hersh was he was basically bribing some Saudi businessmen to invest in Trireme, and in return, they would give him influence in U.S. politics.
The article there is in question is Lunch with the Chairman by Cy Hersh, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
And then, of course, Perle goes on CNN with former AIPAC employee Wolf Blitzer and said that Cy Hersh was the closest thing America had to a terrorist. And this is a man, who spilt the story about Abu Ghraib and the My Lai massacre in Vietnam. I mean, he is not a terrorist. He is a superb journalist. And, of course, Richard Perle, talk about protection. You want to talk about the closest thing America has to a terrorist outside of our own CIA, which is a terrorist organization, it would be Richard Perle. But the other thing with Trireme, which was bigger than the Lunch with the Chairman story that I thought was a scandal that Jeremy Scahill got into in his book Blackwater, and that was when they acquired all these tanker planes from the Boeing Corporation, which is the second largest aerospace company, second largest defense contracts after Lockheed Martin. Lockheed Martin, of course, former president was Lynn Cheney, Dick Cheney's wife, big revolving door. But these tanker planes were completely unnecessary, costing up to $30 billion. And Richard Perle...
This was that complicated lease agreement, right, where they paid
Right.
10 times the purchase price of the planes to lease them indefinitely.
Right, and they went from 35 planes to 100 planes all of a sudden after they had several officers in the Air Force Acquisition Office to comply with Boeing. A couple senior Boeing officials get fired. The head secretary, James Roach, had to resign over it, and one of the Air Force Acquisitions officer, her name was Darlene Durian, got actually sent to jail for 9 months for her part in the deal. But Perle was involved as well. He's on the Defense Policy Committee as well. He was the chairman of it. He ended up resigning from that position after the scandal, but he stayed on the board, and he stayed in the Defense Department for another year. But he wrote op-eds, and he was always pushing on for no big contracts for Boeing anyway in general, and you could go down the list of all the defense contractors. But this one, he made a pretty big mistake because they really dropped the ball. So you had one secretary resigning. He had to resign from his policy board. 3 other people get fired, and 1 person sent to jail. And yet, somehow, he always worms his way out of it, and he never gets in too much legal trouble.
All right, now, if people have their thinking caps on and they remember 2002, 2003, right around then, Richard Perle was all over the place on TV talking about how we must go after Saddam Hussein, etc. But then again, that doesn't make him any different, really, than Charles Krauthammer over at the Washington Post. So what was it that Richard Perle actually did to push America toward war with Iraq, right?
Well, first of all, he'd been saying he wanted war with Saddam Hussein a lot longer than before 2002. You could go back to 1996 in his clean break papers for the Israeli strategy when Benjamin Netanyahu was coming in for the first time into Israel, prime minister there, where he basically outlined, say, let's invade Syria and kick out Saddam Hussein. He also wrote a book called An End to Evil, How to Win the War on Terror, where he suggested that we just abandon all the Israeli-Palestinian peace processes, invade Syria, and then issue strict domestic surveillance with a biometric ID card, et cetera. And, of course, he wanted to bomb Iraq. He wrote 5 papers under the Project of a New American Century, and he signed his name on other papers from the American Enterprise Institute advocating war with Iraq. This is all before September 11th. This is all before 2002.
If I can try to focus on one of those papers for the Project for a New American Century, I believe this is the one that got the most attention inside policymaking circles, probably got the most attention from people like you and me as well, and that was Rebuilding America's Defenses. And that was really the, here's the plan from the Project for a New American Century. Is that correct?
That'd probably be their magnum opus. That was more Louis Libby. Perle signed off on it, but Perle wrote one called Why Bombing Iraq Isn't Enough. I mean, that doesn't make it clear. He was part of all of that. But, yeah, that paper has got a lot of attention, I think just because of the couple lines in there that said that we needed a new Pearl Harbor-like attack in order to justify war, because that went beyond just saying we need to invade these people and giving the conventional BS reasons about WMDs. It actually was like saying, wouldn't it be beneficial if something happened and then we, had an excuse to go to war?
It's also the one that says, maybe we could engineer some viruses that'll just target certain races of people.
Right. Well, then
they wrote that. People, you don't even need a conspiracy theory. It's all at pnac.org. It's right there in front of your face.
Right, and some of the individuals from the Aspens Institute, which Perle was a trustee of and Libby was part of as well, wrote the original Operation Northwoods papers, which also advocated a false flag with the Cubans, saying that we ought to just take an airliner full of Americans and blow it up and blame it on someone else. So there are some crazies like that. I mean, George Bush Sr. used to call these neocons the crazies in the basement. But to answer your question from 2002, how did he personally advocate war with Iraq after that. From 2001 on September 16th, so this is just, about 5 days after 9/11, he got on air and said that Saddam Hussein had ties to Osama bin Laden. No proof for that, no evidence for that. He just sort of declared it, said we know it. By saying we, he made it collective, like I guess him and the Defense Department or he and the government, they knew there were ties there. And of course, that was a lie. But after 9/11, there was so much emotional smoke and a lot of people just willing to bomb somebody, They had all the stickers on the cars and the flags waving that. When they did that, coupled with 2 days later with the Israelis saying that Israeli security forces claimed that Mohammed Atta met in Prague and received anthrax from Iraqis, which was a myth built upon a myth. The original myth came from the Czechs themselves, and Cheney quoted it. And then the Israelis added to that myth that, oh, by the way, they also got anthrax there. That connected Iraq to 9/11. And Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11 or the anthrax attack. But with the neocons, a lot of people continue to believe that because the mass media never really cleared it up that, actually, the al-Qaeda hijackers did not send the anthrax, and there was no VX gas and mobile weapons labs in Iraq, no matter what Judith Miller said, who was dating Louis Libby at the time. I mean, they just flat out lied. And now over 1 million people are dead. So this is why I hate the guy.
Mm-hmm. Well, he was also the #1 promoter of Ahmed Chalabi, the Iranian / Defense Department spy who provided all the defectors that talked about Saddam Hussein's secret nuclear weapons program and his secret storehouses of VX, sarin, and mustard gas, et cetera, mobile weapons, mobile germ weapon labs.
Chemical weapons under the palaces, William Safire said about. But what was interesting,
and this really was Perle. I mean, Perle was the guy, obviously working with Feith and Paul Wolfowitz and Donald Rumsfeld, et cetera, but he was really the one who'd been dragging Chalabi around from place to place for years and years, trying to get people to accept what he was saying.
He did, and he criticized the CIA because the CIA looked at the INC and just kind of said, that's a joke. I mean, they're completely not credible. These men are these defectors from Iraq. I mean, you can't listen to what they said. But what I found interesting is that the lies, the pre-war hype in Iraq about all the different kinds of WMDs and the mushroom clouds, the anthrax, X gas, chemical weapons, blah, 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 the Niger forgeries and so on, that all came from the cabal in the Office of Special Plan. But the lies that they said had already been said in the 90s by the PNAC group. You go and read Richard Perle's papers, the same lies, and Wolfowitz and Feith as well, but the same exact lies, some of the same sentences saying like the lid's about to blow off and things were totally regurgitated by the INC. And when I read it, I said, I've read this before somewhere. And lo and behold, it was in those papers. But at that time, I had a hard time trying to tell people what a conservative think tank even was. Nobody knew what PNAC meant or anything. But I happened to be studying that anyway because what I was doing in college was Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But it was just serendipity. But it was weird that how could they say, he's 6 months away from a bomb when they'd already said that 4 years ago, he's 6 months away from a bomb, and that, these labs are in these locations. The things that had already been debunked is it's almost as if they just told the defectors, look, this is what you're going to say. Then we're going to have a couple of these people in the New York Times quote you on it, and then we'll have the Defense Department, which is essentially quoting itself, go and quote those journalists from basically our own lies that we fed through this medium of the Iraqi National Congress.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's very interesting what you bring up about the CIA cutting Chalabi off there. I remember there was an article from, I believe, before the war. I think it was from late 2002 that ran at Salon by Anonymous, and it was called The State Department's Extreme Makeover. And it was about how John Bolton and David Wurmser, two men who were part of this neocon cabal, though to be fair, Bolton is a lifelong nationalist right-winger, not a neocon. But anyway, he's one of them in their crew there.
He's part of the MIT crowd, yeah.
And these two really came in and purged the State Department of what they saw as the old kind of, I guess, waspy establishment appeasers and UN lovers and that kind of thing, right?
Right, and Perle's always had a hard time with the UN, more so because the UN's passed resolutions against Israel, which is a complete apartheid police state. But Perle supports that. I mean, I was writing this tirade about Richard Perle and the nasty things he did yesterday, And I was exaggerating things, just saying it was like a colorful thing. But I couldn't even make up stuff worse than what has actually happened in Israel. I mean, we're going to talk about poisoning babies with radiation poison, depleted uranium from Yom Kippur to now, or mutilating children with rubber bullets and shooting people at will, or ethnically cleansing people and building walls around them. I mean, that's stuff I couldn't even I couldn't think of anything worse than that without getting, mythical, like with demons or something. I mean, and this is something that Richard Perle is a hard-line Zionist, and he's advocated invading Syria, invading Lebanon, Iraq. He's pushed all through the 80s when he worked for Reagan as assistant deputy defense. And for Carter too, he disagreed with the SALT agreements and SALT II as well. If you remember, SALT was the strategic arms limitation talks with the Soviet Union, and it was a good thing. But he said, no way are we going to get rid of our cruise missiles. And so he even was part of the IGA, International Grain Agreement, from 72, I believe it was, where it was basically grain for Jews sort of deal. It was the first trade agreement ever where they said, okay, you're going to have status to buy these grains. The Soviet Union really needed wheat and rice for their livestock. But we're going to put a little amendment there that you're going to have to allow immigrants to Israel. I mean, why was that even relevant to it, But he got it attached on there. So that's just been a career Zionist his whole life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm trying to remember the name of the article that he wrote for The Guardian when he was kind of riding high on the Iraq War. I guess it was maybe April or May 2003, and they were still pretending that it was anything but a complete disaster. And it was, Thank God for the Death of the United Nations by Richard Perle in The Guardian, where he mocks the liberal conceit of collective security and a new world order based on United Nations-based international law. And that, you see, we don't need your UN Security Council. We got the National Security Council, and we got the Marine Corps and the Air Force, and that's all we care about.
It was kind of a contradictory, thing because technically the legal reason that the U.S. got to invade Iraq was saying that they broke the UN Resolution 1441, which said after the first Gulf War that they weren't allowed to make weapons of mass destruction. Of course, they weren't breaking that resolution because they didn't have any, and they were forced to prove a negative. But technically, that is the legal reason that the U.S. got to invade. So he hates the UN, but when the UN does, if the UN can be used in such a way to get what he wants, then he'll just let it slide.
Mm. Yeah, that really kind of angers me, too, because I've always been for getting us out of the UN and for, of course, the exact opposite reason as Richard Perle. And I sat there and watched conservative Texan Americans change their hatred of the UN from we hate them because they want to do things to literally, this is a direct quote, they're just not proactive enough. And it was people like Richard Perle who flipped the script on them and they went for it. Now their opposition to the UN is based on we want more wars and sometimes it stands in our way and slows us down, rather than this idea of collective security commits us to, for example, war with Russia if Estonia and Latvia go at it, or some ridiculous thing.
Well, I'm no fan of the UN, I think for the same reasons as you, but Richard Perle, it's like the UN to me is hawkish, but Richard Perle's such a hawk that the UN's not hawkish enough for him. He doesn't like it because they're not warmongering enough.
Yeah, then you got Ron Paul. He says, I want us to be unilaterally at peace. How about that?
Oh, I wish we had more Ron Pauls. That's what I wanted to bring up with your last guest.
All right, now listen, we're already over time here, Ryan. I'm sorry for cutting you short, but let me give you a chance real quick here to tell us, well, where are they now? Is Richard Perle just chilling out in his mansion cooking with his copper pots, or is he working on pushing us into war with Iran still, or what?
He's still toting the propaganda about Iran with the whole smoking laptop Mossad BS and
the Mujahideen all-call, his good friends.
When, but the last thing I saw him doing, he's actually embezzled in another scandal in Iraq, procuring oil for himself. And also with the American Turkish Council, he and Feist set up the IAI, the International Advisors Incorporated, which is Feist is the sole shareholder, and I mean it's a dummy, it's a shell corp. But they're just acting the same thing they did in Bosnia, the same thing they did in Israel and also in Iraq. They're kind of acting as the go-between between a little who's who list of the MIC of different countries and using their political contacts to procure them more contracts and no-bid contracts. The no-bid contract thing is ridiculous. They went from the normal 5 to 6 month window to 5 and 6 year long contracts. So he's still being a little Prince of Darkness.
Yeah, well, there you go. All right, now, I'm going to name a couple of footnotes, and I'll give you a chance. Obviously, people can go to Rise 2 Cents. That's RYS, the number 2, and then cents, like the kind in your head, not in your pocket there. Rise2cents.com, and people can just search anti-neocons, Richard Perle, and they can find all kinds of things. I want to mention, of course, Justin Raimondo at antiwar.com has written a ton about it. Jim Loeb as well. Pentagon Home Office to Neocon Network is one by Jim Loeb. There's The Lie Factory by Robert Dreyfuss. Quite a few by Hirsch. The Stovepipe, I know, is one of them. The Gray Zone, a couple of others. Go ahead. You got some footnotes where people can go and read about the neocons. Oh, The Man Who Sold the War by James Bamford in Rolling Stone was a good one.
I think Charlie Reese had some on antiwar.com as well.
Yeah, Charlie Reese. Good call.
Yeah.
All right. Well, listen, thanks very much, first of all, for your time on the show today, but especially for making today the official Hate Richard Perle Day. Everybody, we're all going to go out and read A Clean Break, a new strategy for securing the realm. It's going to be awesome.
I'm hoping people will go up on YouTube, and regardless of whatever topic they're talking about, just slide in there, P.S. I hate Richard Perle.
Right on. All right. Well, thanks very much, Ryan. I appreciate it, man.
Thanks.
All right, everybody. That's Ryan Dawson from Rise 2 Cents. That's RYS, the number 2, cents, SENSE.com.